All right, well, why don't we get started? So thanks to everyone for coming. At the end of the day, we'll have a lively discussion to keep the energy up. So my name is Ray Brescia, here with Jessica Frank from CALI, Alexandria, Decatur, is a student at Albany Law School, and Julia Kosinski is also a student at Albany Law School. And we're going to talk about a program that we've been developing in A2J Author that are guided interviews for nonprofits. Now, to get a sense of the room, how many folks are library background experience? That's where you work. Technicians, IT people. All right, kind of. So
I'm a freshly minted intern who's supposed to be producing guided interviews to serve a nonprofit.
All right, this is the place to be then. I have felt all the last 2 days a little bit like Dorothy. Sort of like I've been asked, so are you a librarian or are you an IT person? So I'm like, are you a good witch or a bad witch? I'm like, I'm not a witch at all. Right? I'm actually a law professor, so I'm sort of in the weird sort of place in between, although I know a lot of people dabble, teach a course here and there. So what we're going to talk about using the guided interview process itself in a substantive law course, and better than me just talking about the student experience, I brought 2 students along who can actually tell you all about the student experience. But I'll just start very quickly with the design of the class, what it was about, and then I'm going to hand it over to the students who will talk about the process and the interviews that they've developed. And then Jessica will talk about how great CALI was with us in giving us technical assistance throughout the process, and what CALI, the support that CALI gives, which again was just terrific. So the work was in a class called The Law of Social Entrepreneurship and Exempt Organizations, which I teach at Albany Law School. Primarily, it's about the law of nonprofits. But also we bring in like benefit corporations and other types of corporate forms. But the students are learning the law of nonprofits, right? The law, the 501c3 law, local, state law in New York, dabble a little Delaware law. But the course is to impart substantive knowledge to the students. So federal, nonprofit, benefit corporations law. It's mostly online, so the substantive lectures and information was delivered mostly online. It's called a hybrid because we would meet monthly in person to do some of the law, but also to talk about the projects. So it was a combination of online, asynchronous, and then in-person where we did the project work. Then we had the project work, which we'll talk about at length in the presentation, was to build some guided interviews around critical nonprofit law issues, which we'll get to in a second. In addition, in order to sort of think through how to do this work and how to set up the A2J guided interviews, students were exposed to business process analysis and to design thinking and user-centered design, really sort of fascinating, sort of disciplined design thinking. Here is a sort of a graphic of design thinking, and it really is about understanding the end user, getting into his or her head, understanding what their needs are, what their interests are, what they want to get out of a product or a service, developing prototypes of that product or service, field testing the product or service, iterating it, bringing it back to change it, to alter it based on customer feedback. And so that's what we used the design thinking process in building the A2J author interviews. And these are what the class projects were, and I'm going to hand it over to Julia to talk about the class projects.
Hello, everyone. So what we were tasked with in our class was to help nonprofits create two of the most important documents to begin a nonprofit, which is the Certificate of Incorporation and the bylaws. And we also set out to create a large document, which we call the white paper, which is pretty much like everything that has to do with starting a nonprofit, running a nonprofit, the law surrounding creating both of these documents as well. So we ended up splitting, in our entire class, we split into 3 groups. We split into a Certificate of Incorporation, a bylaws team, and a white paper team. I was on the bylaws team, and you'll see the bylaws interview in a moment, and Alexandria was on the Certificate of Incorporation team. So using A2J Author and how we began. So the first thing that we did when we determined we were going to use A2J Author and create a guided interview to create these 2 documents was to have a training with A2J, which was led by Jessica. And so we video conferenced her into our classroom, and she walked us through the basics of how to begin a guided interview, which was really helpful because we were a group of law students, and when our professor told us that we would be potentially coding some sort of software program, it was very daunting. But after the conversation with Jessica, we're like, okay, we'll just get a little bit of this training, and it's very, very doable, manageable, and easy for anyone who can use a computer. So it was great. And so first we started with that training, and then we were able to use within A2J Author, there are different tutorials and videos that you can watch to help with different things that you're setting out to do. So whether it's, I'll show you in a moment in the interview, but whether you're trying to determine how to populate a learn more or create different buttons or things like that within the interview, there's pretty much a video or a tutorial on everything within the platform. And in addition, we had Jessica, who was able to answer any and all questions pretty much that we had, and she was very responsive. People in our class would compile lists of questions or problems that we were having and send an email to her, and she was always able to respond back and say, don't use this web browser, or I think you're having this trouble because of X. Here's a link to maybe try to fix it. So that was really helpful as well. And in addition, our 2 teams, so Alexandria was on the Certificate of Incorporation team, and I was on the bylaws team. And each team consisted of 3 to 4 students. My team would meet for a few hours every week, but the bulk of what we set out to do inside the platform, we did independently. So we would we all had the same login, and we would work on it on our own time. And in Alexandria's team, they worked on it together, so they would set aside their hours, come together, and work within the platform. So there's definitely options and pros and cons to doing it both ways, but it was helpful to have one login and have everyone be able to go on at different times. On the downside, it was difficult to have more than one person inside the program at a time. So Alexandria's team had a benefit to be working on it all together at the same time. And another thing about, I think, how our team had a bit of success doing it on our own is that we were able to kind of divide up people's strengths within the program. So I know one student on my team was very successful and understood the variables concept within A2J, and so that was kind of her realm, and my realm was doing the mapping and all of that. So it's helpful because you can use different people's strengths within the program to all work on it collectively. So going into the platform. So this is our beautiful final product, and this is what the bylaws looks like. So when we started in A2J, we had the opportunity.
So hold on, just a time out. How many people have seen an A2J guided interview before?
Okay, so people are somewhat familiar. Do you want to just explain or maybe do you want to explain the concept for those who haven't, just real quick?
So the idea is that there's the guide avatar, which is the lovely redhead. I like that you guys use that. I didn't think anyone would. I like it.
Is that you, Jessica?
No, I usually pick the darker one. But so the guide avatar leads the end user's avatar down the path to the courthouse. The idea with design behind A2J is that it isn't just like a form. The idea is to break up what is a difficult process and can be confusing with lots of words, with lots of white space. So you'll see a lot of emptiness around it, and there's the step signs that give context to the end users and show them how much further they have to go. So we have our attorney giving the help, and then the end user with additional learn more that Julie was talking about.
Yes. So this is not the initial start to the interview, but we each just pulled a few slides that we thought would be helpful just to show you what we created. So these are just a few slides, a bit out of order, but there was a one before, welcome. And then now we're starting your organization. So we were able to take this big, long document that would be daunting to someone creating a nonprofit and break it up so that in these 5, 10, 12 minutes, if you really knew what the answers were, you could go through the program and at the end, click end and populate a PDF which serves as your bylaws, print it out and send it to the Secretary of State. So this is when we talk to you about naming your organization. So something that we tried to use a lot of in the program was having buttons that you can populate the different text for each button. So saying I'm ready to continue or I'll come back, and saying that there are some restrictions if you'd like to learn more. And every slide has the opportunity to add these different capabilities to it. And when you click on a learn more button, like here, I'm supposed to say what's the law say, but when we talk about what the law says, we are able to provide it instead of seeing it in a view like this, which people see as very easy and simple, if you did want to click on the learn more, that is when you would be presented with much more information, which to some people they don't need, some people they do need a lot more information to even continue and move on to the next step. So in addition, on this slide, we were asking in this part of the interview, we were asking the end user how they will remove their officers, which is a requirement to specify how they will do so in your bylaws. And something unique about this program that was really helpful to us is that we were able to provide them with 2 sets of boilerplate language, and that is all that they could select from, or they can consult an attorney. So you do have the availability, no matter what realm you were creating an A2J guided interview inside of, whatever topic or piece of the law or something, you're able to isolate them so that you do not have to have them either type something in or just click a button, but rather these are called radio buttons inside the platform, and you can just provide them with information that you know you want to populate in the end document. And in addition, this just also shows that we wanted that to be part of this interview for the conflict of interest policy, the indemnification clause. Throughout the process of building both of Alexandria and mine's interview, we wanted to make sure that we were being very careful and very safe in how we were allowing the end user to create their bylaws, because most questions, we just have a blank text box here. You know, we say, what's your purpose? What's the name of your organization? Things like that. And we realized it could get a little dicey if we allow them to put, what is your conflict of interest policy? And that's kind of how we started. And we were learning as we went too that that's not something that would be very simple and quick for someone going through this interview to have to lay out. So it was nice to just provide boilerplate language and say here, accept our conflict of interest policy, accept our indemnification clause, which are ones that we know the Secretary of State will accept, rather than having them go through this entire process, create their own policy and print it and have it be denied. So that is why we either say accept ours and continue, or consult an attorney and return. So those are the main slides that I wanted to show you from our bylaws interview. Oh, and also just that you can learn more and just see how the big text box pops up. It's more clean without it, but for many people who don't know why they would accept our conflict of interest policy, the learn more lets them know. So that's a great capability, and we use that on every part of our interview.
And so while they're filling all these questions out, filling these text boxes in, and then you said it before, it generates the document at the end.
Yes, and it's really neat because I've showed it to friends. I know at our clinic at Albany Law School, we have a community development clinic who has been using this platform already to help their nonprofit clients, because creating the document from scratch or just even the fill-in it's daunting, and going through just step by step here, you can feel more comfortable, and it is a more enjoyable experience. So yeah.
So what was your process initially of figuring out what the steps were going to be in creating did you do bylaws, or you did?
Yes, the bylaws.
Bylaws. Okay, so did you make like a flow chart or something, or what did you do before you actually got into the software?
Great question. So each team was tasked with, I think the very first thing we did after we broke out into teams was we were tasked with creating and turning in a storyboard. And so we created a storyboard for what the interview would look like, and that really made us break everything out. And kind of lucky for us that the bylaws and certificate of incorporation are broken down a bit, just in general, with the headings like board of directors and purpose of your organization. So we did, for the most part, go off of that, but there were certain areas where it needed to be broken down even further. So, I think we have a couple questions in a row, like will you remove directors? Okay, how will you remove directors? What's that process like? So we started with a storyboard, which I think was much shorter than our ending interview, because we started there and then we realized that will be too much to ask someone to do. We'll need another question. But that's how we started, and I thought that was really helpful.
And that's what the business process analysis, we brought in someone from the University of Albany to talk through what business process analysis is, and that really helped with creating the flow charts and the storyboard.
Right. And I think, just as a side note, I think an important part that we learned from Jessica was just thinking about who the end user is, and you'll hear more about it in a minute, but when we initially set out, we were thinking, okay, the end user is, just lay people creating nonprofits, so learning how to use simplified language and breaking questions out so that it's not this huge, let's throw all this information at you that you might not read and you'll just click next. We wanted to really make it simple for them, so that's how we did it. Okay. Yeah. And with that.
Yeah, do you want to go to the certificate of incorporation?
Yes.
And then we're going to get back to the beta testing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so as Julia mentioned, while her team was working on the bylaws, my team was working on the certificate of incorporation. So the certificate of incorporation is a rather simple document that just provides basic information about your nonprofit organization. So you have to provide the name of your organization after you check that the name is available, the purpose of your organization, and then the names of your directors and their address information. So that's basically what you're going through and filling in this interview here. So the first part that I chose to show you was the disclaimer. So we spent a great deal of time going through the disclaimer and trying to formulate the correct language in order to have it be clear to all users that this is providing legal information and not legal advice. Because that was a constant struggle that we came across, was making sure not to overstep that line where we're providing legal advice to individuals using this platform. Yes.
I'm sorry. Are people expected to use the program and then just get the end result, or are you going to go through the workflow and then you have a competition with clinicians or something like that?
Yeah, so right now, whenever individuals have questions throughout the interview, like if they click Learn More, the button that we saw on some of Julia's pages, that would encourage that, in addition to providing additional information that they can use to complete that section of the interview, it would also normally encourage them to consult an attorney if they had additional questions. So what we're looking at now is who's the end user for this product. Should we allow individuals to use it on their own? Should we have a consultation with an attorney as part of the interview, maybe using it as a form of a questionnaire where they sit down with an attorney, provide answers, and then the attorney walks them through the different steps of the interview, or if it should only be provided to attorneys. So that's kind of the question that we have left to answer right now. So moving forward, the next step was providing incorporation information. So first we ask individuals to provide a name for their corporation, and we encourage them to do a name availability search, which they can do online, and we also provide the link for that. But here I included the slide on your corporation's purpose and framing or formulating that statement. So basically we provide an example for individuals to read through, and that's in the Learn More section, and we encourage them to form a 1 to 2 sentence purpose statement for their organization. So when you click on the Learn More button, this is the information that comes up. It's basically the different types of nonprofit corporations, and then you'll see an example later on, and also links to helpful information that can be used by users. Oh, additionally right here, this link goes to that white paper guide that we referenced earlier that one of the teams was working on. So if they have further questions, they can consult those pages of the white paper guide, and it'll provide further information. This is just that box continued where it provides an example of the purpose. So then moving forward, the third step is putting in the information for your directors. So first we ask for the number of directors, which can be anywhere from 3 to 10 directors. 3 is the minimum allowed by law, and 10 is just the number that we picked as suitable for this interview. Because we encourage you, if you have over 10 directors, basically, we encourage users to consult an attorney for that, or to fill out an addendum, like an attached chart, rather than go through these steps all in the interview. So here I just selected 3 directors for demonstration purposes. And then you would input their name here, its full name, and through the entire process, we also have the Learn More button up to the side, where users can click to get more information about what they need to input in the steps. And then finally, we have the addresses for the directors. So here is where, for each director that they input the name for, they'll have to input the address. So for instance, this is for the first directors. So it would populate their name in the question, and then you have to input their address information. So throughout the time that we've been beta testing these interviews, we've basically done 2 beta testing sessions. Our first one was in March, and that was in Schenectady. That was mostly with Albany Law School and University at Albany faculty, and mostly just academics who we were looking at getting feedback from regarding the interviews and the different steps that we had compiled here. And then the second was in April. That was in New York City, and we went to the Pro Bono Net offices, and there we also conducted, it was more nonprofit involvement. There individuals who were looking at starting nonprofits, individuals who provided legal assistance to nonprofit organizations, just really getting their feedback. And there we got a lot more detailed and nuanced feedback, particularly about the legal information that we provided in the Learn More sections on each of those steps of the interview. However, at both we got really great feedback, and we changed the interview at each step to create the interview that we have today. So another important step during those beta testings is that we provided the link and login information to participants in advance. So they were able to log onto the system and work through it at their own pace, really go through all of the information that was available through those Learn More links, and really get to know the platform before we receive feedback from them. So I think that was really important because we got a lot of detailed feedback based on their review of those materials. And then finally, as Julia mentioned earlier, we have provided access to this platform for Albany Law School, for the students enrolled in the Albany Law School Community Development Clinic for this semester. And they began using the platform with some of their nonprofit organizations, ones that are startups and ones that were already established that wanted to change these documents or alter them in some way. So that was especially helpful for them. And we also kind of ran like an abbreviated presentation or beta testing for them during the school year. So as I mentioned earlier, this is kind of our main question now. We're looking at who is the end user for this product. Should it be strictly attorneys? Should they be the only ones who have access to this, or legal professionals providing legal advice, legal expertise to nonprofits in their formative stages? Or should it be more of a questionnaire that can be used with the legal professional and the individual starting their nonprofit organizations in conjunction, maybe during an initial meeting? Or should it be open to the general public? And basically, if it is open to the general public, how do we rectify the problem of having too much information where it could be overly burdensome or be overwhelming to individuals who are using the program and who might not have a legal background, while also providing them with the legal information that they need to successfully complete the form and not have to resubmit it again and again for small errors. So I think we mentioned some of these already, but these are basically the feedback that we have from our experience using A2J Author. So
this is for you, Jessica.
Yeah.
This slide's for you, Jessica.
Yeah. So one of the issues that we came across was the inability to access the platform from multiple computers or multiple usernames simultaneously. So as Julia mentioned, both of our teams that were using the platform kind of had a different approach at making sure that we could get all the information up there while also communicating and making sure that we had a final end product where everybody's input was there. So, I mean, you can work around it, but it's just sort of a limitation to the system at the moment. Also, we were hoping at the beginning we wanted to have avatar that was, you could choose like a genderless avatar, but we found that that was a limitation to the system as well. It's sort of preset into the system that you have to choose a user avatar, and the only two options can be male or female. So one way that we found to sort of work around this is to say that you're choosing the user avatar's gender. You don't necessarily have to choose your own gender, because also people might think that we're gathering that information for a different reason, or they might just not feel comfortable supplying that information to us. So we thought that that was a way to sort of work around that. And then finally, as you saw in one of my slides, we have to input information, the address information for every director, and currently there's no way to validate that information. So it's possible that an address could be entered incorrectly, and for that reason it could bump back the entire form, and the form would have to be resubmitted again. So that's currently a limitation, as you cannot validate the address when it is input into the A2J Author system.
I had one more that we had talked about, was the ability to give access to people during the beta testing phase without giving them the full access, right? So what you all had to do the beta testing was to duplicate the interviews and put the duplicate online and give people access to that. So if they messed with that, if they played around with it, it wouldn't mess up the interview that you guys had done. So if there was a way to sort of give beta testing access, make a beta testing version of it, so that people you would be password protected, people could use it as if they were using the final version, but not be able to mess with the program itself, that guided interview itself. Any other ideas?
I think one more was, this is super technical possibly, but in the program, especially when we were beta testing, I remember a few people had said, when you go back a slide, if you push back, most people in their mind, when you're on a site, you would just push the actual back button, which would just take you back to whatever site you were on before, and it would potentially be gone. So putting like a flasher at the top that's like, do not push your browser's back button, or something like that, just so when they came back, they were at the same place that they left off.
But you probably could do a pop-up there that said, are you certain you want to exit the program, right? That would...
It's because you were running it in the authoring environment. In the actual standalone viewer, the back button is disabled. Like the browser's back button is disabled.
So just in the...
It's because it was in the testing.
Got it. So before we go on, next is handing it over to Jessica, right? But before we do that, do you have any questions for the students or for me before we get into CALI? Yeah, good.
Where's the data stored that's entered into these forms?
So it depends on where it's hosted. Most guided interviews are hosted on a national server called Law Help Interactive, which is run by Pro Bono Net, which is where they discuss beta testing. Pro Bono Net is a nonprofit that is funded like A2J Author from grants through the Legal Services Corporation. So their data is stored in their servers, and they have a whole privacy policy discussing how long they keep data, what happens to it. We have analytics built into our viewer like Google Analytics, but CALI is protecting the data rather than Google being able to access the data. We have on our website a whole discussion about how we handle data and what we do with it, and our privacy policy is on our website. If you self-host, then it's your responsibility to however you handle that data. So those are kind of the two main options right now. You can either self-host it or you can put it on the national server if you partner with a legal aid.
What about with New York State's Office of Court Administration? They're using A2J Author like crazy.
They partner with Law Help Interactive. They have the courts have a contract with Pro Bono Net. Yeah. So yeah. Yes. Okay.
Does your interview cover whether or not you should incorporate to begin with? Does it cover that whole discussion whether or not your project is not-for-profit, or maybe you should be a sponsored program or something like that instead of...
The white paper, right?
Yes. Yeah. The white paper that we direct users to, that is a large part of it, because what we discussed in class is, there's a lot of reasons not to create a nonprofit. Like, you don't always need a nonprofit. So yes, in the white paper it does. In the interview, mine doesn't.
Mine doesn't either. It directs you to the white paper, but it doesn't provide that information right on the interview.
But it's a great idea, and definitely something that our track has led us to believe that this will not be to the general public and lay people. However, if it were, I think we would definitely add in more questions at the beginning. I imagine saying, here's some of the downsides, or are you sure that you need a nonprofit to accomplish your goals? Are you sure you need to incorporate more things like that, and provide them more information? However, I think because we're kind of leaning towards having this be in the hands of attorneys and legal professionals, might not need that step.
They're making that call, presumably, whether the client should incorporate, and then once that decision is made, they can utilize the guided interview. But it's interesting, just to go back on a process issue, we had about 13 students in the class, and the students, we divided up 2 teams to work on the A2J Author, but then a team that didn't want to mess with the tech. Right, they're like, we'll work on the white paper. So students were able to opt out of using the A2J Author, and they worked on the white paper. So it was equally divided, both basically amongst the students. Here and then over here, yeah.
So how many credit hours was the class, and what percentage of the class was creating the A2J Author project? Or how long do you think it all took everybody to do?
It was 2, right? And this falls 4.
Yeah.
Was it 2?
Yeah, we've just upped the credits.
Okay, well, when we took the class, it was 2 credits, and I would say it was more work than 2 credits. And for the most part, once we determined the project and had our login and everything, a majority of everything that we did was inside A2J. And this class met remotely. I don't know if we discussed that, but we only met in person maybe
Once a month.
once a month over the semester. So in between meeting once a month, the entire time nearly was dedicated to being inside the platform. And because of how much work this really did entail, in the fall, this class is 4 credits.
Upcoming fall,
Yeah, this upcoming fall, and it's totally warranted, the 4 credits. But we loved the experience, so we're fine with the fact that it was 2. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but students that were not in this class were excited about what we were doing, and I think you have a pretty good enrollment in the class for the fall.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's 4 credits, I think, and meeting once a month is really desirable to students.
And then you all stayed on, so it was offered in the fall, then the 2 of you stayed on in the spring to sort of do the beta testing, because I don't think we could have finished, everything in a semester. So we built, so you all got 2 additional credits this spring.
Yes.
For doing the finishing touches and doing the beta testing and all that. And we're going to do that again this upcoming year when we have a new project where the students will enroll in the course for the fall and then have the option of staying on in the spring to do to put the finishing touches. Over here, your question.
So I have 2 questions, and one was about the credit hours, and one of them is, my wonder is, so I think that if I did it in the fall, I would do it as an optional add-on on top of the clinic course, but the clinic course would be where they would be learning the substantive law, and it's a sort of more finite project. So think about 2 credits as an add-on. So it's a 6-credit clinic plus a 2-credit add-on, but the other part of, at that point, I'm dominating 8 of a 12 to 14 credit load, which makes a big difference in terms of what students have to juggle, and I'm wondering if you think that's fair.
I will say that I did take the class in conjunction with the clinic. I was enrolled in the community development clinic for the fall semester, and I was also enrolled in this course. And I think that it was very beneficial to be enrolled in both at the same time, because not only was I working with these documents in both courses, I was helping a new nonprofit complete their certificate of incorporation in the clinic, for instance. The same time I was completing the outline for the certificate of incorporation. So it worked together very seamlessly. I could, and not only that, but you're both were working with the same nonprofit law. So in my clinic class, we would be reading and reviewing the law, and then I would have to interpret the law to a certain extent to include the statements in the interview.
And your clinic was 6 credits, right?
It was.
And then this was 2, so that was 8 for you.
Yeah.
Did you feel like that was fair? I could probably squeeze 3 out of my administration as the add-on, but probably not 4 for the add-on.
I thought it was manageable, just because you could work, your client meetings and the amount of time and when you spent that time working on the interview around your other courses.
But I also like the idea of the 2-credit follow-up.
That's what I was going to suggest for you, that maybe 1 credit in the fall of teeing up the issue.
Pull them in.
Yeah, and then do the 2 credits in the spring.
Great.
Something to think about.
And here's my second question. What about a learned non-lawyer as the custodian? So in other words, I think that when you're dealing with transactional work, to some extent, there's an idea that there's a greater likelihood of the possibility of paying for an attorney somehow. Whereas in the work that I do, there is 0 likelihood, and I know exactly how many people in the state with the particular matter get represented, which is a very small fraction of the total with the need. And so for me, having an attorney have custody of the product isn't an option. It just isn't a viable option without thinking about how that would work otherwise. But I do have this option of the learned non-lawyer, specifically a domestic violence advocate who works with the county-based shelter system, having custody of the project. And that would be the means by which someone would be able to access it. So I'm wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, I think that that's a great idea. I don't know if the equivalent exists in the nonprofit law world.
Doesn't.
I don't think so. I think that is like the perfect medium and the perfect middle ground for what we've been struggling with. I don't really see a problem unless it's super legal.
Yeah, I mean, what we designed it originally. It was only when we did the beta testing with the lawyers that they started, saying, this no one could possibly replicate all of the judgment decisions that I'm doing. That's what we think. That's what lawyers think.
Yeah.
But we designed it, and the students were very careful about this in never giving advice through the interview. It was, here's the law, make a choice, right? And I think at least in New York, that's legitimate. I mean, we've got the case, the Thse case, from New York State, how to avoid probate, the big case that challenged unauthorized practice of law. And they said very clearly, if you're telling people how to represent themselves, not giving them customized advice that's tailored to their particular situation, it's totally fine. And so that's the legal environment. I forget where you are. What law?
New Jersey.
New Jersey. So, that's the legal environment in New York, where if you're giving people the information for them to make the choices that they want to make, that's completely legitimate. And I don't know if that's the sort of, and Thse has been sort of followed by a lot of state courts.
We don't have a case that spells it out so clearly, but the relationships that we have with the court make it clear to us that particularly in areas like this where there's no viable opportunities for representation, that literally anything that would promote the ability of people to understand their circumstances and make better choices is acceptable to them. So I think that they're very much on board with advocates in the domestic violence context, providing a great deal of supportive information. They don't call it legal advice specifically, but they are very green light about it.
And we have in New York State, I think it's sort of similar to what you see in with immigration practice. In New York State, by statute, an advocate can go to court. A victim's advocate can go to court with a survivor of intimate partner violence. I don't know if you've got that. So there's a special class almost in New York State for a domestic violence advocate.
It's not that progressive, and I will also say that I think New York has something that we don't have, which is you have that fund for civil representation in addition, where it expands the opportunity for a person who's unrepresented to get counsel, because I don't know whether it's a court-appointed cycle or how it works, but it essentially, an attorney who would otherwise be pro bono can apply for a certain kind of funding. And there are some of those resources, but much fewer in New Jersey. So it's one of those circumstances where the court, and then some of the decisions coming out of the court have been very permissive. So I feel good that we have, but this would be the custodian that I would be projecting would be, in this instance, this learned non-lawyer who would be able to help someone, access the material. And I think it's a very, unlike what you guys did, it's a very finite, if you want to testify about this, you have to modify your document thing, and here's how you do it, kind of. So I think it's a very narrow, but thank you for all of your feedback. It's really helpful.
And New York State, we mentioned before, OCA, the Office of Court Administration, has a lot of DIY, I think they call it little DIY forms, and a number of them are for domestic relations and intimate partner violence. So you can see what people have done and see if you could replicate it in New Jersey, because there's a lot out there in New York State.
Yeah, the assumption in New Jersey now, the study they did was 67% is unrepresented, and so basically all of the approach in New Jersey by the courts, to the extent that they're implementing any new projects, they're assuming unrepresented with so much of what they're doing right now.
And there are 1,100 guided interviews out in the world there, and knock on wood, none have been, we haven't had a case where a guided interview or a hot text template or the only ones that have been challenged are the ones that are like where attorneys charge people to use them, like LegalZoom and that kind of situation. Those go up, but 4.5 million times guided interviews have been run, and we haven't hit an unauthorized practice of law situation. Knock on wood.
The actual rule in New Jersey, I think, requires that you had some kind of benefit from.
And a lot of these are done, kind of the law school areas in the last couple of years, but a lot of these are done by the courts themselves, which can't really or by legal aid attorneys who say, I'm a legal aid attorney if it had to come up, like, you know, I wrote this as an attorney. So it's really when it comes into the area of the law students, and there's a bunch of papers and law review articles arguing for First Amendment rights, you know, and that so our space kind of has made the argument and it hasn't been challenged for over a decade.
Now, so we had another class together this last spring, and there was a great expression that we learned in that class from community partners, which was the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. So I've never heard that expression before. It's great. But did you feel, so one of the points was of doing this, the sort of pedagogical goals in the class was certainly to expose you to the technology and how technology can improve access to justice. That was certainly one of the goals. But also to see if it would help you understand the doctrine and the process of representing a client in the situation. So, you know, you don't have to say it was beneficial, but did you feel that you understand the process of incorporating through the article of incorporation or creating bylaws? Do you feel you understand it better having to break it down into its component parts and interpret it through this technology platform?
I definitely think so.
Yes, I do too.
One of the sections of my interview, which I didn't show, it's a law section, and it basically like sets out the 4 different laws that apply and that you have to agree to when you fill out your certificate of incorporation. And my team, each of us went through and read the document in its entirety, because we had to provide some sort of summary for users so that they could read through it, providing an overview, but again, not overstepping and providing like legal advice or trying to interpret the law, but just providing that general overview. And I think that was really helpful, at least for my team. And I know I learned a lot about nonprofit law that I can use in classes moving forward and in clinic experiences.
Yes, definitely. I feel the same way. And through this project now this summer, I'm working at a firm that helps like new businesses start, and I've had to do a certificate of incorporation for for-profit business, and same thing with the bylaws. And I actually wish that this just existed for that. And I definitely feel way more knowledgeable because of having to do this process, which I didn't really know anything about prior to this class. I will say one other thing that I thought was really helpful for anyone thinking that they might introduce this to a class or to your school or something is that just not by happenstance, but kind of, Alexandria and I helped a year ago or last fall with a beta test. We helped with the eviction
with Pro Bono Net.
We helped with Pro Bono Net, and we helped run a beta testing inside an A2J interview. Well, part of it was like the eviction proceeding. So I would just really recommend that before any student is introduced or has the first training call with Jessica or anything like that, that students that you just go over any interview from Law Help or from A2J first, because I think it was a little difficult even for some members on my team who were like, well, who's ever going to see this, or how would this work in real life? And, you know, we saw one with an eviction proceeding and how you were walking down the steps to the courthouse with each question being asked. So we definitely had the background of, okay, this is what it looked like when we saw it in an eviction proceeding. Now we're just applying a different topic. So that was really helpful.
Any other questions? Yeah.
So has anybody else that have done these projects with A2J Author, has anybody ever done one that maybe is like shorter and less time consuming or something like that, that could maybe just be a smaller segment of a class?
Yep, so we've done the A2J course project, was a grant-funded project that we had for 4 years. There were 2 rounds of it. And in the whole point was to get more law students to make guided interviews. So not just to benefit, so the CALI benefit of it is that we want law students and legal education to have a benefit. So we want students to learn this tech competency. But there's also our A2J legal aid side that says even legal aid attorneys don't have time to learn how to use a piece of software. So digital natives who have time and credit and 6 credit hours or 8 credit hours to spend doing something can partner with a legal aid attorney, and they can give the script or the rules of thumb and all that, and the student can get do the technology side of it. So we have done 2 rounds of that, and we have over 14 schools that have done A2J projects like this. And so the scope really is up to the faculty or the way that it can be done. You can have a full course dedicated to it, like a practicum. You can have it as part of a clinic. They've done it. They've done it as part of a survey of technology in general, and they have me do a 1 hour, how is legal aid using technology, or how are the courts using technology like this. You can have it, we had one that was in a like a professionalism course, and that this is part of learning. You learn how to interview people better when you have to think of the questions that they might think of ahead of time. You learn how to ask questions in plain language, which is a skill that we're paying a lot of money as attorneys to learn fancy words, but you really shouldn't be using those when you're in these kind of interviews, in these kind of situations. So wide spectrum of the ways you could do it, of course.
And you have some slides.
I do,
yeah. You want to show them?
But quick to address these because I didn't pay them, but these was like a perfect tee up for this. So to answer your experience, multiple editing. So we are hoping to have a situation like Google Docs where you can have one Google Doc open and multiple people at the same time. It requires some back end and users and saving and that kind of futzing. So it's a future feature add, so we know. Flexibility with the avatar design. We will be rolling out shortly additional avatars that do not ask the gender question, because we know it's not the proper way to ask it. And it does make people uncomfortable, and there's all these hacks, like don't ask the question at all, or have to explain why you're asking the question. And so what it will be is we'll say pick your avatar, and it's going to show kind of like you pick the author avatar, the sliding scale of skin tones, the sliding scale of hair colors, and a young male, young female, in both in a wheelchair, and then older male and female in a wheelchair, and it'll just be like pick whoever you want to represent yourself. So hopefully that gives more options for users. The address validation is also one of the feature requests. There's been requests to pull in like there's a way to pull in like Google Maps and like to do it, so we're thinking about it. And then the allowing for testing. CALI in the fall will be rolling out A2J.org, which will allow law schools to host without having to partner with a legal aid or to pay. It'll be part of your CALI membership, and that would allow you to host for client interaction and for testing. So you'll basically just get a link that they would be able to test. Cool. So we have that at least. We're thinking about it. So I just have a couple of slides to show how CALI can help you in your law school. So I am A2J's project manager. A2J Author is co-owned by CALI and Chicago-Kent Law School. I spent 4 years at Chicago-Kent teaching a course much like yours with practicum students running it. And then I moved over to CALI 2 years ago. So in the history of the practicum, this was my old boss, Professor Ron Stout. He started the course in 2010 with law students learning how to use A2J Author. And they had 20 hours of field work to get that. Who is the user? They sat at a help desk at Cook County in the Daly Center, which is the busiest civil courthouse in Illinois, Chicago, and they had to work with pro se litigants themselves. Then they did a research memo, like your white paper kind of idea, and they did a process map, a storyboard. We also had them partner with legal aid organizations. Then they made the guided interview, and they gave a final presentation. So this was kind of the genesis for the A2J Clinic project. So 2012 was the first one. You can see the schools. 2014 to 16 was the second round of it. Initially, it was called the A2J Clinic project because we thought it would be in clinics. We thought they would do part of the work where they would learn the skills of interviewing and working with actual clients, and then the interviews would be used in the clinic like further on for the next semesters. It didn't, there was more of a wide range of people wanting to introduce it into doctrinal courses, or the ones that schools that didn't have clinics working in that area of law. So the next year we called, or the next round we called it the A2J course project. Okay, so those are just two of our advertising slides for our clinic project and our course project. Some of the samplings of student projects. So this kind of gives you a hint of what students can work on. These are actual projects that mostly came out of my time as the co-teaching the course at Chicago-Kent. And they're all over. We partnered with legal aid organizations in Illinois. So Illinois Legal Aid Online is a major user of A2J. But we also partnered with Legal Aid of North Carolina, Kansas. We've done like Montana. We did one for the federal courts, one for an Indian reservation. So it really could be, it doesn't have to be a legal aid that is close to you in person, because a lot of the work happens in the interview, can happen through email. Maybe your students are interested in moving to a certain place, so you can make that connection. I just heard from one of our partners at Kansas Legal Services that one of my former students has a job doing guided interviews for Kansas Legal Services because of the connection she made, learning the software in the class and then working with the legal aid as well. So she'll be starting there. So how can CALI help you? So this is our lovely CALI drawings, our pictures. So I'm here to help with the front end side of it. So teaching you the interviews, doing the classes, helping with the emails, and I do a lot of software development working with our developer. Tobias, who's here with us, Tobias Entrejo, is our back-end web developer for A2J. So he and I are the entirety of the CALI A2J arm there. And Tobias can help with back-end server setup. So if you want to host it on your own organization's website or your server, because you're concerned about where's the data going or who's owning the data, we can help set that up for you. So here's kind of an example of a slide deck that I've done. The training goes through the basics of A2J. I teach you the different parts of the software. I explain how document assembly works. We just talk about different functions. So I've done training sessions that are 2 hours. I can do in-person ones, mostly remote with law students. And I do about 5 to 10 of these in the fall and spring semester. So it's cool for me to come here and hear you guys talk about how you did this in your class, because I don't get to see the final product. I always see like the beginning scared faces on that go-to meeting of like, what is the software? What are we doing? So this is awesome for me to present with you guys and hear about it. And so coming soon, a2j.org, which will be provided as a CALI member service. So pay those CALI dues. And we have self-hosting right now with great instructions that Tobias has put up for, we'll require your like systems administrator, like don't go right now and try and self-host it, but fairly easy. One-on-one tech support, that's me with emails. And I do trainings, not just I do a series in the fall with our partner at Law Help Interactive, where it's 8 weeks of training twice, 1 2-hour period once a week. We record those. I also do monthly webinars, and so I try to edit and then record those to make them 20-minute videos so that they're easy to digest. So our YouTube channel has about 40 videos in total, and about 15 are specific to the current version of A2J. And then I'm available for questions if we have any. So,
But they're super responsive. Jessica's fantastic.
So the self-hosted, like, if you want to host it yourself, it's PHP, right? You guys,
Tobias.
PHP and JavaScript?
So one of those, like the viewer and the document assembly tool we use, the requirements are basically PHP, Node, and basically any web server, like Apache, Nginx, or Langy, whatever, doesn't matter. If you want to run it in Windows, IIS, or Linux, then that goes along. You have a pretty up-to-date PHP. Some folks.
And we've had law schools take that option. So the document assembly part of it is relatively new in the last year or so. And we've had a school in Kentucky who had a student that was doing like a master's in computer science and doing law school at the same time. And he took the instructions and ran with it, and it's a really awesome project. So it's possible, even he had it up and running much faster than we expected. So it was really cool to see students just run with it. That's cool. Other questions? No. Did everyone turn in their raffle prizes? You want your raffle things? I'm going to get down there for the fish slippers.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank
It's
you.
really great.
Thank you.